See a little red. There we go. We are now live. Hopefully, people on the channel will be able to see us. I'm delighted to be joined by David DeBatto and Gabrielius Landsbergis. David, over to you, because this is our third live stream in the format, and you always do an incredibly punchy intro to why we are doing this format.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Jonathan Fink. Yes, this is our third in a new series of live streams, which is being co-hosted or primarily hosted by the Silicon Curtain. And I'm trying to get my technical glitches worked out, and it will be co-hosted also on the No Delusion Zone on YouTube. But we're thrilled today to have the former foreign minister of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis. He's been on both of our channels before. He is, in my opinion, one of the most honest elected officials, former, current, or otherwise, that I've ever talked to. I think Jonathan would agree with that. He is an expert on European, NATO, EU, Russian, and Ukrainian relations. He is right now a visiting fellow at Stanford in California for about a year, where I'm sure he's having a blast. It's beautiful out there this time of year. So without further ado, let's get started. Again, Gabrielius Landsbergis. Jonathan, why don't you start off with questions, and I will jump in with my my normal chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start with the cancelled Hungary so-called sort of peace summit. We haven't talked, and obviously we've had the Alaska one since then. I always thought the Alaska summit was just simply a piece of hollow political theatre, that the chances of peace were zero and Putin doesn't want peace. But I've been called, I'm channeling my particularly cynical Ukrainian type view on this. What's your view of both the failed Alaska summit and the suspended Budapest one?
Well, first of all, it's great to be on your show. Thank you both for the invitation. And yeah, greetings from California, which is not so sunny today. It's a funny thing when talking about these events, either Budapest or Alaska or, whatever happened in between, because it feels like a roller coaster where, before every announced meeting between President Trump and Putin or a phone call, most of the observers, most of the Europeans, are holding their breath. That this could be it. This could be the defining moment. Now we're at the entering Munich Munich stage, basically. Where Ukraine might suffer something at the hands of two leaders, and then again it passes, and and on it goes. And look, I mean, we've soon be entering the first year of that roller coaster, and I ask myself a question, that are we devoting enough time to to watch the fundamentals, and what fundamentally can and should be changing in order to not to come to this sort of situation. So fundamentally, I mean, I fully agree with you that Putin's goals have not changed. I don't think that he can change those goals. He continues wanting to control Ukraine. That's how I would put it. The ceasefire is not something that would work for him. If we don't trust him to hold on to ceasefire's agreement, well, imagine a person who is 1,000 times more paranoid. So it tells you that he would never trust Ukrainians to hold on to a ceasefire. If he doesn't trust, that means the forces that are holding the line will have to stay there. And that means that he is, basically he has a frozen conflict that doesn't serve any real purpose for him, neither politically, nor militarily, nor geopolitically. That means that his goal is to continue. And and all the diplomatic overtures, they might give him an opening, might bring him back on the international stage, but it doesn't solve the war. So we need to be looking at again, as I said, at the fundamentals as to how to change the situation. And unfortunately, there's no other recipe. There's never been as to strengthen Ukrainian hand. So that's one, and steel ourselves, because Putin might continue escalating, on our territories in the West.
Well, you interact with a lot of European leaders, diplomats, apparatchiks, and so on. Are there still sort of residual delusions anywhere in Europe that we can go back to normal, that Putin can be dealt with, that there is genuinely a deal to be had with Putin? Because my observation of Russia over the decades and my interaction with Ukrainians tells me, and of course people from the Baltics and Poland tell me that there is no deal, there's no realistic deal, and you could not trust Putin to hold to any deal in any case.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about strength. The only thing that we should be talking about is balance of strength. Who is stronger in the battlefield? Are we able to stop him? Are we able to make him pay for what he's doing? If we are, then we're on a good track. If we aren't, then we're in trouble. Everything else is at the very least it's naivete. Now I've been reading the comments in the press about the so-called peace deal that is being prepared by the Europeans, and I'm not sure whether that's really what is going to be published, or if it is going to be published, that 10-point, I think, or 11-point deal, and part of it has even sanction removal. If Putin would freeze the line, the contact line. So it doesn't, the way that Putin will read it, he will read it as weakness in any way. To begin with, that the deal. I mean, we're not even talking about this, but this is an important point, that basically somehow the Europeans are now accepting the notion and hiding behind the Ukrainians that a current contact line should be accepted as a ceasefire line. In effect, it already leaves a big chunk of Ukrainian territory in Russian hands. That is already a victory in Putin's minds. And if Europeans would really be thinking that after the ceasefire, there's a sanction removal, that means that you're leaving Putin with what he occupied and rewarding him, which is completely crazy. And people are arguing that, look, the biggest difference is that it's not de jure, we will never recognize the occupation, it's only, de facto. Well, I'm saying, okay, so then it's Sudetenland, but not de jure, but de facto.
Gabrielius, let me just add in a couple of things to what you're saying. I recently wrote an article about how I'm really tired of hearing the word deal when it comes to Ukraine, because from Trump's mouth, that means a real estate deal. It has nothing to do with diplomacy, strategy, territorial integrity, or international law. And he wants to make this deal with Putin. And Putin also, of course, wants to make a deal, which is to seize initially Donbass and then the rest of Ukraine. But let me jump forward to my question, which is the Goebbels of the Kremlin, Peskov, recently said that the European elites were the ones that sabotaged the recent meeting that was canceled between Putin and Trump, and that they're the reason for the war continuing, and that they know, the European elites know, that the reason for the war is the root causes that Putin and the Kremlin have talked about since the beginning. Could you expand upon exactly what the root causes of the war of Russia against Ukraine really are?
Well, I think that Putin is rebuilding his sphere of influence into the, first of all, the grain zone countries, which have been left out of NATO enlargement. But I think that his ultimate goal is basically to see, what is Western zone, so to say, diminish or being changed to unrecognizable state. And I think that this is why he sees President Trump as some sort of an ally, because the statements and even the sentiment that is coming from Washington since the inauguration that Europe has to take care more about its own security and all these things, which you might argue that they are quite right in a sense, but the funny thing is that they coincide with the thinking, right? So Putin wants Americans out of Europe because that's the only thing that now he fears, that Russians and previously the Soviet Unions were worried about. That basically we cannot take on Europe because of United States offering the Article 5 and having it as a common security area. Now, if Americans are out, or I mean, the sentiment is that they're out, that gives Putin an opportunity. And I'm not just talking about Ukraine. Ukraine is, is one country of many where he would see his influence, where he would like his influence to be expanded. So that is why, we are being caught in this, I would say, perfect storm. From two sides. We have an enemy that is, has ambition, and we have an ally who's probably losing a purpose, a sense of purpose to stay.
Well, we have talked about this many times in the past, Gabrielius. Do you feel at this point that the European nations, whether together as a unified organization under NATO or the EU, or even as a smaller subgroup of the larger ones, Germany, France, the UK, and so forth, are able to stand up to Russia right now, whether it's through leadership or strictly through military might? Are they, number one, have they acknowledged the threat that they are actually under, and are they right now up to the challenge of standing up to Russian aggression?
Look, I mean, it's just, let's see the facts. I mean, a country of 40 million was able to withstand Russia through ingenuity, through political will, the will of the people to fight. I mean, of course, it's mired with thousands of problems, but they managed to, right? I mean, we would like the situation where Ukraine, we would like the situation that this Ukraine wins against Russia, right? So that should be ideal. So we're not at the ideal scenario, but we're not at the worst scenario. So when I'm thinking that countries, like Germany and France and United Kingdom and the whole European continent united, has trouble imagining that we would be able to inflict damage onto Russia to an extent where Russians would not want to continue. That is, I don't know what it is. At the very least, it's lack of imagination.
How about political will?
Yeah, I mean, but it's, it seems that we lost the ability to imagine things, right? Like it's out of realm of possibility, because maybe people are thinking, well, if we do just anything, then it's nuclear war, and we cannot withstand that. Well, Ukrainians don't have this in their equation, right? They're not thinking, well, maybe let's not shoot at Russians because we might risk a nuclear war. They're defending their country. Right.
Well, and I've said this before, and again, you and I have had this discussion several times about Europe's inability at this point to stand up to Russia. If every nation bowed to every nuclear nation like Russia or China or even North Korea that threatened nuclear war, then what's the point of international law? We would just say, okay, threaten nuclear war, and here's a blank check. Just what countries do you want? Because we're going to just lay down in front of you. This is outrageous. And I know you've spoken out against this for years.
Yeah.
There are some interesting nuances, though, aren't there? Just to jump in there, because just yesterday we had a massive attack on a Russian chemical plant, a critical plant for the production of ammunition in Berdyansk, using Storm Shadow. And not only is Britain not sort of shying away and saying, oh, no, we didn't have anything to do with it, we're scared of nuclear war. No, we're seeing a fair degree, I dare I say, almost of boasting and pride. Yes, they're using our Storm Shadows to level their factories. So there are some nuances within Europe about countries that are more afraid of that scenario, more coercively controlled, and some that are less. And of course, you're from the Baltics. I would say the Baltics probably fit into that Ukrainian mindset, in that if war came to your door, I could imagine, and maybe I'm wrong here, most people in the Baltics, fighting in the way that Ukrainians have. Have I got that wrong, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, so one thing about the latest attack, I mean, it's an excellent example, and I'm really glad that you brought it up. This is what I've been using as a theoretical example. Like, this is how you build up pressure on Russia, right? So we have to tell that, and one of the biggest leverages that we can create on Putin is that if you continue this, you won't have an economy, not because of sanctions, but because you won't have any factory that is still working. And I mean, it is possible to, to limit escalation and to kind of to slow down this, the escalation ladder, but basically telling, look, Vladimir, you have thousands of factories, but we have 10,000s of rockets. And they're pretty, well guided. We know the targets. We will help Ukrainians guide them. And, and by the end of this year, you won't have any industry to talk about. And look, the same thing happened with with the Black Sea. I mean, I've used, maybe David also, I mean, during our conversation, I mean, I might have used this example where, at the beginning, Europeans were saying, well, all of us were saying, look, there's nothing that we can do, to help Ukraine to figure out what to do in the Black Sea. They build up their weapons, they build up their maritime drones, and now all of the Russian fleet is locked into few ports in somewhere in the east, and that's it. You don't need a drone for every ship that there is. You basically need to tell that I'm able to hit every ship that is out there in the sea, and that works as a deterrent. So for Russians, this is what they should be thinking about, that every factory, every point of industry is now a target. And it's just a question of time. We have a calendar and we're going day by day, by the value of the piece of industry. So I'm really glad that, that United Kingdom is participating in this, and I'm truly, it's an amazing achievement. Now the Baltic mindset, yes. I mean, the problem is that in the Baltics we tend to be consumed by our smallness, so to say. We're not a country of 40 million like Ukraine or Poland. Lithuania is the biggest out of the Baltic states, and we're 2.8 million. So for us to consider us being able to fight, it's a very difficult psychological challenge. And I've tried to argue that in Lithuania, that look, I mean, Finland is not that much larger, a country of 4 million people, but they overcame, either from the success of the Winter War, I mean, the ability that they've shown that they are able to, to inflict damage on much greater enemy. But they have this, that they are not constricted by the fact that they're a small country. And I would like us to see, to be a bit more like that, right? I mean, yeah, we're small. Yes, we're 2.8 million, but with enough technology, with enough, if all of us work together, and especially if all of us in Baltic states, we can definitely inflict a lot of damage on an attacker.
And of course, Russia's particularly, sorry.
No, Jonathan, go ahead, please.
Russia's particularly vulnerable. I mean, it talks about its size, its infinite resources, all these things that we see in propagandistic narratives, which seem to have very much fed into certain parts of the US administration. But Ukraine has shown that size is a disadvantage. If you take the electricity nodes, the power, thermal plants, and so on, Moscow's incredibly vulnerable. Ukraine's just chosen not to strike those particular nodes, but it's taken out, 20% of Russia's oil daily supply and hit 40% of its refining capacity. Extraordinary kind of achievement. So do we overestimate Russian strength and underestimate its vulnerability?
Yeah, I mean, it's all... I mean, Ukrainians are acting like, very, very similarly, like countries in the Second World War, fighting against Nazis, right? Your goal is to win, right? You have limited resources, you have limited supplies, limited amount of friends, so you do whatever it takes, right? And ingenuity is being born out of necessity, right? So it's like the saying goes, and. So this is exactly what happens in Ukraine, right? So they are not sticking to the old plans of of a pre-war pre-war planning or the conceptions or some blocks of thinking that, for example, constrict us in the West so many times. They're looking at the inventory that they have. They're looking at Russian map and they're figuring what would fit where the best. And and it's amazing. And I wish we would do more of that. Right. So there are ways how to inflict damage. There are ways how to make Putin pay for what he's doing in Ukraine, or even for the drone incursions and so many other things. But I mean, we're still not learning so much from Ukrainians. That's the sad part.
What making him is going to happen, Gabrielius, in the near future? Obviously, the meeting in Budapest has been canceled. They're blaming the Europeans. It doesn't really matter. Do you foresee Trump ever, because a lot of people are interested in this, Trump ever actually using the advantage that the United States has, at least, in pressuring Putin to come to the table? Or is this going to just be an endless round of bluff?
Well, I would say that, we never know. Honestly, we never know. It is too difficult for me to say that this would, it would be impossible for me to say that this would never happen. But I would say that at this stage, Europeans have to act as if we are alone, as if we don't have American support where we most need it. And that, so kind of form this mindset. And if the things change in Washington, if President Trump decides that he wants to, to participate in this in a meaningful way, really to putting pressure on Putin, then we accept it and we'll be happy about it. Don't close the door, but prepare for the situation that is as it currently has been for the last, almost 10 months, that unfortunately we're in this alone.
And when you said pay a price, that really sort of triggered something there, because I've been looking at various statements from European leaders, which go part of the way towards a solution. But it seems to me that they don't fully understand both the toxicity of Putin's regime, the fascistic nature of it, but also to understand what would count as a high price in Putin's mind. So where we do hit him, we think it hurts, and on our scale with elected representatives, it would hurt, but actually we're more of an irritant than a pain. And I think there was a comment by Jens Stoltenberg recently that, unfortunately for me, just sort of echoed that. He was talking about inflicting pain on Russia, but it's quite clear that his concept of the pain that we could inflict really is not going to change Russia's mindset. It's something that Kirill Budanov talked very compellingly about, that we have to understand what price is too much for Putin, and we're nowhere near that point.
Well, there are a couple of things. So one is the price that Putin is already paying to an extent, and another price being, he's paying because of Ukrainian action. So we can always make this price, we have means for this price to go up. Additional weapons to Ukraine, right? So, so there have been talks about Tomahawk, there were talks about Taurus, for 3 years now. That is one way how to do it. Give Ukrainians more of what they are, able to use. An example with Storm Shadows is an excellent one, right? And allow them to use that. This is how this will surely make Putin pay. Now, the other question is whether we are able to ask for a price when there's an escalation on the West. And it's a bit more subtle. So not necessarily this should change. It could change ultimately Putin's behavior vis-a-vis Ukraine, right? But it should show that it's not, it's not just an invitation to walk over the Europeans. Because in some cases, it is what it's felt, at least as a person, who, as a European, 12 minutes in Estonian airspace with a fighter jet. Well, basically the message is, it did not pose any threat. That means that it's fine to do that. So, and it will continue. That it will continue. So, how do you make sure that he would get the message, okay, there is a price. I mean, 12 minutes, Europeans got irritated, and now suddenly my airport near St. Petersburg is not working. Or 20 drones, and I don't know. Suddenly people need to check their pagers because they got worried that something might overheat in their pockets. I'm using an example that has been an operation in Middle East. So kind of I'm suggesting the ideas that do not necessarily change the calculus of Putin in Ukraine, but clearly it would change the calculus vis-a-vis Europe, right? Because now everything is an invitation. I've asked a question. So 12 minutes with a fighter jet in Estonia is fine. Is 30 minutes still okay? 50 minutes with 2 jets? I mean, but, by saying that it's fine, we basically then allow his imagination to run wild, right? So he might not attack at this stage, right? Anything, but he will continue. He will continue intimidating until one day, basically the frog will understand that, okay, that the water is boiling.
Gabrielius, I'm going to ask you something I've asked you before, which is basically putting you on the spot, which is fun. By the power anointed on me by King Trump, I now appoint you King of Europe. You are now in charge of NATO and the EU. Complete power, just as Trump thinks he has here in the United States. But very seriously,
some people would like it.
Well, some would like it, some wouldn't. Same like here. But assuming you had this power, people would listen to you, and your word is law. What would you do to enact policies, rules, regulations, and actions for NATO? Let's just say NATO at this point, to successfully confront Russia. You mentioned the MiGs over Estonia, the airports that have been closed over Germany, Denmark, and other areas. What would you do to change the current policy that NATO has in successfully confronting Russia and at the same time planning for the future support of Ukraine, if you had all the power over Europe?
Well, for Europe it's a bit easier because one thing is immediately on top of my mind is confiscating the Russian frozen assets, right? So that allows European countries to finance Ukraine for years to come, at least a couple of years to come. But I mean, it's an enormous amount of money that would really make a difference. For NATO, probably what we need now is it's developed response scenarios to what we still call the hybrid activities, where we would be able to draw a very clear red line that this is it. I mean, hybrid or non-hybrid, there is an element of war. Russians have malign intent against NATO countries, and there will be a response. And we need to figure out the instrumentarium as to what instruments we're going to use, as I mentioned, because so we don't want to trigger a nuclear response, clearly, but there are ways how to make Putin pay. That would calm people down in the eastern flank. Basically, they are defended, that their airspace is defended, that the skies are defended, that we have the capabilities. So that's number one. Probably the second, again, from top of my mind, changing the narrative as to who needs who more. We've always been talking about that Ukraine needs NATO more. And that is true to an extent, basically, that Ukraine does need NATO. But now I think that we're at the stage in time where NATO needs Ukraine. And that means that we have to start integrating their knowledge fully into the preparedness of the eastern flank. When it comes to drone defenses, when it comes to long strike capabilities, and that would in turn start creating a new deterrence measures. So if Russians know that now we have Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, Finns, Poles have the capacity using Ukrainian technology to hit every single factory that Russians have, the same way that Ukrainians are doing that, Well, that is a deterrent, right? Because you have troubles fighting, Ukraine alone, and suddenly you have all the eastern flank arming up with the same, with the same weapons, and not by 2035, 2040s, because now the queues at all the factories that we're procuring equipment are so long that stuff will arrive in 10 years, and this is where Europeans are saying, well, we need 10 years to be ready. Well, Ukrainians are ready now, right? And, I mean, as much as they can. So we should be integrating and learning everything that we can, and really get this match going. That's it. Ukraine is already a part of European security architecture. That's it. That already happened.
I have to jump in here because you make an excellent point that I don't want to rush past. I can't tell you how many articles I've read over the last several months where Europe, especially individually and as NATO, say, yes, we will be ready, like you said, in 5 years, in 8 years, in 10 years. We've just passed this new policy where we're going to gear up, and in 5 years, we're going to have, a drone wall and blah, blah, blah. That's insane. That's too long. I get what they're saying, but you know better than I ever could. Do they have the capacity, if the political will was there, to ramp up their defense industries so they could be ready to implement the policies that you're talking about within, say, 2 years, 1 to 2 years, if they really tried? Or is it beyond their capability?
No, I mean, we managed to put a man on the moon out of political will. There was a political decision. Agency was established, a rocket was built, people were trained, and next thing you know, people are on the moon, right? So everything is possible, like literally. I mean, it's the as you say, I mean, it's the matter of political will, whether we have it, where we see that it's needed or not. I've always used this example, and I will continue using it, that so far, Europe has spent far less on Ukraine than it has on COVID. I haven't checked the numbers, but I mean, I was told that also, when there was a debt crisis in Greece, Europe has spent more on Greece than on Ukraine. So it tells you where on our, on a table of problems, where is Ukraine? So it's not the top priority, right?
So they have the money. They have the money. When they scream that we don't have the money, that we're going to have to cancel all of our social safety networks, people will be on the street eating out of garbage cans. That's BS, isn't it?
I mean, it's how you define the problem, right? When the COVID hit, the problem felt so acute that, that Europe for the first time borrowed as a union, 750 billion euros. Part of that money is still not spent, and now it's being used on defense. 150 billion is from the COVID fund, but there is no new instrument, no new vehicle that has been created with the new money to fund our defense. That means that we still don't see that as a major problem, as major as, let's say, COVID.
And in our modern world, where we are very far from, let's say, the memory and experience of the Second World War, and mobilizing, the whole of society to get behind that, we are, unfortunately, a couple of generations away from that. Someone of my age would have had relatives who relay that experience, but people who are younger don't. Is it not the case that we can do all these things? We can ramp up and resist Russia, but we're not going to do it until we get properly bitten on the backside, until it's absolutely necessary. Then politicians will be able to craft the narratives to bring their populations around. At this point, in the UK as well, if we run the risk of hammering social services, then Russian narratives and information warfare will find a ready environment to divide and conquer, actually, if we're in the midst of a phony war, inverted commas, but ramping up spending.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, before the Second World War, France, the government had real issues because of the budget deficits that were running some 5% or something like that. And the Minister of Finance said, well, that he's going to resign if he's forced to spend more. A couple of years later, the situation was dramatically different. For the whole France. United Kingdom before the war as well. I mean, Chamberlain ramped up spending on defense. Up to 4% and a bit more of the GDP towards defense. But at the height of the war, the spending was almost 50% of GDP to defense. So it's, that is a problem. That's not a problem, but that's the way the democracies work, right?
And Ukraine's at 60%, I think.
Yeah, Ukraine's
at least 60%. At the high point in the war.
Yeah. And before the war, many Ukrainians, even Ukrainian officials, would have believed that, we won't have a war, as did many countries, my country, and so many other people who believe, well, maybe it's still avoidable. Maybe we don't need that much. So that is a problem. That means that it could lead us to a situation where we, with our delayed investments, that we are in a way inviting again the increased escalation against us. Because look, David, we spoke with you about this, that, so for the way that, very simplistically put, how Putin is thinking. We're telling him that, look, in 10 years, you won't be able to attack us. That's for sure, right? Because our factories will be then running in full speed. We have ammunition, we have tanks, we have drones, we have everything. We'll be fine in 10 years. So he looks at the watch and says, well, fine, okay, that gives me an idea when I need to do things, right? And for him, this opportunity is either from now up until those 10 years, or later he might have lost his chance.
Well, I've spoken about this a lot. You and I have spoken about it, but I've written articles, and I said specifically, and this was the United States during the war. You mentioned the war. During World War II, the United States went from nothing, from having less than 100,000 people in their military to having 10, 20 million in their military. But more than that, they went from building nothing to building hundreds, thousands of tanks every month, to building thousands of ships every month out of the Baltimore shipyards, for example, of building thousands of bombers, B-24, B-17s, and so forth every month from zero. Granted, it's the United States. We had a much larger defense base before, but Europe, actually, if you put all the NATO countries together, you have a larger base than we do, both of the economy and the defense industry. It all comes down to the same thing, Gabrielius, and I hate to keep harping on it, but it's political will. And I've said this before. Tell me I'm wrong. That there are still too many business interests, financial interests between some European corporate leaders, especially, but some elected leaders in Russia. They still don't want to cut the cord totally. A lot of them have, but I still think that's not a major, but is a part of why they're still hesitant about poking the bear 100%.
There's additional element in this. When you're talking about the interest, you see, the way that military industry works during the peacetime is that we produce very expensive, shiny things in the very small quantities. They look good in the pictures, they create deterrent, and basically easy to store, right? So you have 10 rockets that can fly anywhere in the world, and this is, you don't need more, right? But they are incredibly expensive. And now come Ukrainians and they say, well, we don't have those rockets, so we develop something that is extremely cheap, very expendable, and we have abundance of it. And when you try to argue with representatives from the defense industry, and you say, well, maybe we should be spending at least part of our money, let's say 10%, 20% or something that's, kind of has a Ukrainian mindset behind it, right? So it's cheaper, more expendable. There are people who are fighting tooth and nail for it, against it. Because they would say, well, but what about our, super expensive rockets? Because you clearly need those, and yeah, there's a tiny problem. They will arrive by 2040, but look how shiny they are. And
that's how they described it at Brave One to me. They called it ugly stuff that works.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. So you have an interest there. Well, I would say, okay, fine. So we lack so many things. We have political will. We lack the money. We have lack the funds, that would have been created in order to fund all the things and prepare them now. Okay. So what do we do with the resources that we have, which are limited, and the threat that is just out there? So we use a Ukrainian example and do the things that Ukrainians are doing. And suddenly you are fighting and home, because people just don't want to do it, because that hurts their interests. So that is also an interesting thing to consider.
So political will and just greed, both by the people who have interest in Russia and by the defense industry that you just mentioned, who wants to keep making those expensive, shiny things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that we don't need those, right? I'm saying that there is a chance to combine, to combine the stuff that is needed to implement in NATO regional plans and everything. Lithuania is buying tanks and tens of new tanks. But I believe that at this stage, if we want to get prepared and deter Russia, there's no better example has got to do it like Ukrainians.
And I know you have to jump off, and you've been very generous with your time. But I follow a lot of sort of divided opinions, including Edward Lucas, who is, I think, one of the better analysts. And he is saying, don't overhype the possibility of a full-scale invasion of the Baltics. However, that's maybe... I still fear at the back of my mind that with the Russian mindset and its deeply possessive psychology it has over the Baltic states, that Putin may still try something in the near term.
Well, again, I mean, even though I'm talking about my home region, I wouldn't be too much surprised about this. He wants to put pressure on Europe. He wants to divide Europe from Ukraine. And putting pressure on Europe could serve, him quite well. Meaning, he wants people to start asking questions: should we be sending weapons to Ukraine? We have troubles at home, and we need to take care about our own security more. So ramping up those shadow activities, the shadow war activities, that would serve the purpose. I know, I've spoken with Edward, a lot of times, and I know what he means, and I agree with him. But there is a fine line between overhyping and then coming to such a degree where people are not doing what is necessary. And and it's very, very difficult to navigate that line, right? So if you say that, well, we are going to be attacked, and people freak out and they just stop doing anything because they're so worried about this. But you say, look, we're completely fine. Everything is okay. We have Americans in our back. Germans are coming. We'll be fine, and people will just relax. And and then we have, just people spending hours and hours upon silly conversations, and rather than doing the right thing. So then you need to say, well, unfortunately, we're not as safe as as we might think that we are.
Well, I'm living in a country where people for years overhyped the danger of Donald Trump to democracy, and look where we're at.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and I guess I can leave it with, look, Gabrielius, don't expect the 82nd Airborne Division to drop in to defend Vilnius or to stand on the other side of the Narva Bridge. Should Russia do this, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that it won't happen, so I'm not entirely there with you. I'm saying that what if it takes a bit longer for them to arrive?
I'm just saying that the Americans aren't going to be there. I'm sorry. It pains me to say this, but I mean, unless it's a full-blown nuclear attack, I don't see Donald Trump specifically allowing or deploying American forces to defend the Baltics. That's a horrible thing to say.
Worse, he may even just get in the way and distract people to create the space for it to happen. I think the British will be there, but we know that the Brits have underinvested in defense since the 90s, since they took the peace dividend. So this is going to be, I think, a painful shock when we have to ramp up and do the right thing, which we will do, but it's
not right away.
It's too slow, far too slow. I know Gabrielius has to jump off and leave us. It's been incredibly generous. Massive pleasure speaking to you once again.
Really, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you to you both. Real pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you. And David, we could stay on the line and we could explore some of these issues a bit more if you've got a few more.
Sure.
Minutes, so.
Let him get back to his academic paradise.
Yeah. Absolutely
it's
fascinating.
great having him here. We've both spoken to him before, and just an incredible individual.
A great privilege as well to be able to have time and gain his insight.
Absolutely. No, I just want to again apologize to some of the viewers, especially that are watching this on the No Delusion Zone, because they're only getting half of the broadcast, I think. But in any event, I'll hammer it out.
Apparently, it's working, and you'll upload it. We'll get the full file over, and we'll get that uploaded, so people can see the full thing.
But every week, we're going to do this every week, Wednesday at this same time, correct?
Exactly right. Yes, this is a perfect time. Wednesday's a great day, and we're going to try and get more guests on. So I know you've spoken to a whole bunch of interesting people, as have I. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. So we're putting together a target list, I think. A good one for us would be Benjamin Tallis, Jessica Berlin. There's some fantastic commentators we should get on. But let's aim high as well. Let's see if we can get some of the
I know
big fish as well.
Has already agreed, General Ben Hodges. So,
excellent.
And I know that we've gotten extremely great, good reviews from both 10 Downing Street and the White House. So that's a plus.
Well, I'm not sure they're watching this, although I thought I'd throw this out to you. I mean, this is completely separate to what we're talking about, but let's get back to your own domestic psychodrama. I noticed that one of our comrades in the trenches here, or the digital trenches, Jake Bro, actually got into a Twitter spat with JD Vance, and after that happened, he was quoted on the Solovyov show. He basically did a whole segment on Hegseth's tie and why it was absolutely a Russian tie. You know, people come out and saying, yeah, but they're the same colors as the American flag, British flag, etc. Now, you go online, that exact tie is listed as a Russian flag tie. You will not find any American tie listed in any online store that looks like that. So interesting that, he got the attention of Vance, who, hit back with something suitably inane and sarcastic. And then it was picked up by the Solovyov show. And of course, what they were doing was amplifying it by saying, well, look at what they're saying about Hegseth. He's one of our guys. We're not going to deny it. Here it is. So we've got this incredible, I would say, echo chamber or feedback loop, which actually, this is a classic of Russian propaganda, is to get high-placed people or analysts in the West or their own Vatnik agents, whoever, to say things amenable or make the Kremlin supposedly look good. And then they amplify that to their own domestic population and say, well, look, you might not like this war, but we have people in the enemy camp and they're saying we're right. So this is, unfortunately, quite a big propaganda win.
Well, I mean, the Republican elected officials in both the House of Representatives and the Senate have for years been echoing Kremlin propaganda. They've literally spouted Kremlin talking points on many occasions. Excuse me. So that's nothing new. The fact that it's gotten down to the blogosphere, the pundits on the right wing, the extreme right, doesn't surprise me at all. And J.D. Vance, being a similarly thin-skinned individual like his boss, Donald Trump, it doesn't really surprise me that he would start a little Twitter or any other kind of spat with a pundit like that, an analyst. Doesn't surprise me at all. And look at all the things that J.D. Vance has said that's promoted Kremlin talking points, going back to the Munich security meeting last year, I believe, or was it earlier this year? I forget, where he basically lambasted NATO, put them down, and proposed Russia as the right party in Ukraine, that they were the victim. I mean, just outrageous things. So none of that surprises me. Him wearing a Russian flag tie or attacking a pundit like that, not at all.
Not at all. And they're busy demolishing a historic portion of the White House at the same time with no permissions. No permissions. You can't even hear change a window in anything that's a listed building. Unfortunately, if it's not listed, it can still be historic. And unfortunately, there's no protection. But as soon as there's a listing, you can't even change a window fitting without permission.
Did you read about the latest, even above and beyond that? I just read it today about the Trump Arch de Triomphe that he wants to erect
No,
in
I haven't.
in
No,
the
I haven't seen
square.
that.
Yeah, in DC. He wants to elect I don't know what it's going to be called, but it's patterned after the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, but of course about Trump, because he sees himself as a victorious Roman, god or general. So he's going to have this erected. I don't know who's going to pay for it. Nobody knows who's going to pay for it. But it's going to happen, I'm sure, right after the gargantuan, grotesque new ballroom is finished.
So I imagine there's going to be a lot of gold on it. I mean, do they dare make a statue of him with side profile with his, adult diapers and whatever else he wears? Looking
Him sitting
weird
on a golden toilet, I think, would be very appropriate.
Yeah, golden toilet would be good. Maybe he'd do a little dance. You could animate it, with his little. Yeah, I know we mock, but it is grotesque. And
mocking is great. The best thing about dictators that you can do is to mock them. I actually got a lot of grief when I mocked Putin, and I did some fake Russian characters and mocked him. You know what? They hate that.
Yes.
Trump really hates being mocked. So I say, bring it on. All the mocking we can do, and sarcasm is great.
That's why Death of Stalin was almost immediately banned. I mean, a number of reasons have been put forward, but one of them, of course, is to mock current dictators is bad, but they also have a retroactive sense there. You cannot mock dictators of the past, no matter how bloody and cruel. And not just mockery, make them look ridiculous, make them look like a sort of pantomime freak show. And I think that's one of the areas we are missing in tackling Russia. We really should be investing, yes, in bombs and factories and whatever, but we should be investing in a propaganda division to churn out vicious satire. We really should be doing that.
Follow up on that, I just so happen to think that I am still searching for a documentary filmmaker, preferably Ukrainian, to follow up on the ideas I have been given to make a mockumentary about Putin based on my article about 2 or 3 years ago called My Meeting with Putin. It would be a smash hit. Ukrainians would love it. It would be a morale booster, fairly cheap to make. So seriously, if there are any documentary filmmakers out there in Europe or the States, or especially in Ukraine, please contact me either through my channel, through Jonathan here. I am dead serious about.
Could be like Life of Brian, couldn't it? It could be
Absolutely.
Life of Vova.
Well, let them. I'd be more than happy to send them the original article and my ideas for this. It would be a mockumentary. Putin would hate it, and it would be so well received by Ukrainians. And anyone else.
Imagine that it was somebody else was chosen in his place. And actually, this is an alternative film about Vova, who didn't become president, but he did become, maybe the boss of some secondhand, car dealership, but with the same kind of,
Well, even if I interviewed him, but it was actually one of his doubles, and I didn't know it. One of his many doubles. I mean, there's many, many, many ways to do this. It would just be a smash. Relatively cheap to make, and I've had some interest, but not enough. So if anyone knows a documentary filmmaker that would follow up on this, please contact me or Jonathan so we could get this going.
So let's reach out to Kalin. He's got quite a good, and even Operator Starsky. I mean, you can imagine Operator Starsky playing.
Yes,
playing Vladimir Putin. That would be
it's wide open.
Little Jewish guy playing, it would be good.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm very serious about that. Anyway, so if anybody please has any ideas about filmmakers that do this, that want to do this for Ukraine, for the opposition, for the anti-Putin crowd out there, please contact me or Jonathan. Excuse me.
But to complete that thought on impunity, I know not everyone is sort of fired up by historical buildings. They're much more concerned with more direct humane cost to Trump's regime. But it does seem to me that this sort of demolition of a building, and I know part of it was dated back to 1942, but actually the core structure dates 1902. So given that the US is a much younger country, that would certainly count. It's more than 100 years old. That would count as a significant piece of US heritage. To simply tear it down without any sense of restrictions or legal due process. That's another sign to me of the impunity, but it's also emblematic of what's happening with the Constitution as well. He's treating the slightly less easy to define abstracts of political culture in the same way that he's treating the bricks and mortar.
It's desecration. I mean, when I read about that, of course, my heart sank even a little bit more. But there's so many things like that going on that it was just one of them. I mean, to me, it's actually a corollary, or it goes along with his feelings about America and our traditions and our laws, which was embodied in his recent Truth Social cartoon, where he was a bomber pilot dropping shit on American cities. Literally, he was flying a jet over him, and he was wearing a bomber pilot hat, and he was dropping feces over American cities, which is the way he feels, just shitting on Americans. Can you think of anything worse than that, even from him? So him desecrating the White House, putting up an arch to himself, stealing billions of dollars from the U.S. Treasury, his crypto coins, also, which is illegal. He can't just make U.S. currency, but he is. It just goes on and on and on and on, and it's all embodied in that Trump shitting on America. That's how he feels. He is the ultimate authority. He could literally do anything and get away with it. And so far he has, but last Saturday showed that we're all not in agreement with that. And I'm talking about the No Kings protest. Millions and millions of Americans showed up on the streets and said, no kings, no way. And that's just the beginning, Jonathan. We, the opposition, the resistance, are just starting not to wake up, but to get out and show Trump how we really feel. And there's more of us than there are of MAGA.
And 7 million people on the streets and not a single documented arrest. That is an extraordinary level of I would say, peacefulness for such a large set of gatherings. And then you see the comments from Speaker of the House Johnson and others basically trying to equate anyone who opposes Trump as essentially being sort of fascists, left-wing fascists, terrorists, traitors, violent mobs. Where you have a set of people who are so far from reality, so willing to tell the fattest, juiciest lies with absolutely no compunction and no sense of shame whatsoever. That, unfortunately, to me, is one of the closest comparisons we have to 1930s Germany. And often says, don't bring up the Nazis. But when you strip back, all of the regalia and stuff, what you have there also is absolute impunity. They don't want to be mocked. They want to be taken seriously. They want to be feared. And they are going to other and tarnish their opponents, even if it's so far from the real world. It doesn't matter to them.
Yeah, but, Jonathan, if they, when I say they, MAGA, specifically Trump, Stephen Miller, his chief of assistant or deputy chief of staff of the White House, J.D. Vance, Kash Patel, the whole crowd, when they literally quote Hitler and Goebbels and on occasion Stalin, how can you not equate them to Nazis or fascists? I mean, that's insane. And I got in, not an argument, but a discussion with a MAGA person on my my YouTube where they were saying, you can't call them Nazis. They never quoted Hitler or Goebbels. And I said, well, you really need to read anything because, they have. And then they were angry that I said, we are going to have Nuremberg style trials in the future, not right now, because these gangsters, these criminals who call themselves the U.S. government will eventually be held to account and indicted and put on trial. And they got all angry because they said, well, the real Nuremberg defendants were mass murderers. I don't even want to get into that, but I mean, half of this country, as I've said many times, are composed of imbeciles, and that's putting it mildly.
I mean, they didn't start off being mass murderers.
Of course not. They had to work.
They had to start somewhere. And there's a fascinating book which is called Hitler's First Victims. And that's where they first started to set up the concept on a very limited scale of concentration camp, not even concentration camps at this point, but just testing the waters of what they could get away with,
Like here
what
now.
laws they could break, yes, what judiciaries they could coerce.
Yes.
I'm afraid to say they seem to get more resistance in that early phase in Germany than I've seen on display in the first 6 months of Trump. There was more legal pushback in Germany, but we all know where that ended up.
Well, I'm scared to death. And you and I have had this conversation many times since January 20th, when Trump was sworn in, how the major institutions in America have just caved. We're talking the Supreme Court. We're talking the biggest law firms. We're talking some of the biggest, most well-endowed financially universities. The CEOs of the largest corporations in the country or in the world are made their way to Mar-a-Lago in the White House, bending knee, giving billion-dollar-plus gifts to Trump, and the list goes on and on. That was just the first few weeks. So yes, I mean, it was actually faster than what happened in Nazi Germany. So I'm very scared. I still think we're going to pull out of this based on last Saturday, but it's not going to be right away. He's still now deploying troops to the major American cities. The Supreme Court allowed him to deploy troops, after all, to Portland, Oregon. Yeah, there's a temporary restraining order, but basically they said he could. Active duty or federalize the National Guard. They're now in Chicago, as almost everybody knows. They're in Memphis, Tennessee. They're still in Los Angeles. They're in New York. Stories every day about federal troops and ICE agents in New York in Times Square. And he's contemplating all over the country. I've said this before. It's a matter of days, Jonathan, before he invokes the Insurrection Act, which is essentially martial law. And we are ruled at the point of a gun by the American military on the streets. That's not hyperbole. And anybody who says that I am being too panicky and that I'm spouting propaganda obviously has their head where the sun don't shine, because that's what's going on here.
They need to watch some of the videos of the absolute brutalization of people being wrenched out of their cars, kids wrenched out of the arms of their parents and carted off, because whether these people are illegal or not, what we're seeing here is no adherence to due process whatsoever, which means they already have impunity to do this. And just the fact that these people don't look like you and me means that they now have the impunity to then move on to other groups, whether it be journalists, whether it be academics, whether it be people who they can label and tarnish. Eventually, they come for everybody. They also come for regime supporters sooner or later. So that's a word of warning to the
did you read the latest
ultra MAGAs?
The latest political victim is John Brennan, who's the ex-director of the CIA, is going to be indicted next.
Yes, so, and Mr. Bolton as well is also in a degree of trouble.
In rough shape. Yeah, he's already been indicted. The former director of the FBI has been indicted. Letitia James, the current Attorney General of the state of New York. He's going after the district attorney in Atlanta, who indicted him, I think the first one, on trying to get those 18,000 votes. Find me 18,000 votes in Georgia during the prior election. So he's trying to indict her. There's a whole hit list of major political people from, like I said, FBI directors, CIA directors, attorney generals. And so he fired another inspector general. I think the only inspector general left in the United States from one of our banking agencies. These are the people that oversee fraud and abuse. And since Donald Trump is the king of fraud and abuse and a convicted felon in his own right, of course, he doesn't want anybody overseeing fraud and abuse in his government so he can continue to steal more. I don't know how out of control this can get, more out of control, or why even the MAGA, some of them are supporting him. But obviously, it's that magic word again, Jonathan, imbeciles. To know the truth about this and still support him, you can't, your brain can't go all the way to the top floor. There's something wrong with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to keep covering this because it's a terrifying moment in history, but it's not too late to pull it back from the brink. We've had some great suggestions before we wind up in the audience here. We've had lots of brilliant comments, lots of engagement. Some people saying that we should get General Breedlove, and I think certainly that would be great. I haven't spoken to him before. That would be a great one on. Chuck Farrer, a friend of mine, it would be a great guest. We had Jason Smart, but also thinking John Bolton. I was in contact with his office actually, and we just haven't made it happen yet. This could be quite interesting, you know.
General
John
Milley,
Bolton, General Milley. Yeah, let's give it a go.
Yeah, no, there's many, and you and I know, are both working behind the scenes to get those kinds of guests on here, and we will. We have both interviewed some of the leading figures in the world, whether they be politicians, authors, scientists, you name it, and we're going to have them on here. So, you know, folks really need to stay tuned to this live stream every Wednesday at this time to listen to those interviews. And of course, Jonathan Fink's brilliant observations on what's going on in the world.
Yes, well, another one of those about to go live on the second channel. I got the news channel about Kirill Budanov and the energy industry apocalypse that he is unleashing on Russia. So yeah, keep those coming. Those seem to be popular, and the algorithm likes those at least. It doesn't like the interviews quite so much, but a lot of influential people tune in.
People
need to go. You got to listen to No Delusion Zone too.
They need to go to No Delusion Zone on YouTube and become a subscriber. Because I talk about what we're talking about today and more, and I also interview some of the same folks and give my unique brand of chaos and not holding anything back. I kind of think that I am the Ozzy Osbourne to Jonathan's Henry Higgins, but that's just my opinion.
I was thinking more Brian May, if we're going to keep it in the sort of musical,
Okay.
But no, we'll definitely make that happen, and we'll keep it going because I think this is super important for today. Thank you. You helped secure Gabrielius, brilliant guest, and I know the audience will have appreciated that.
Okay, I agree with you. And till next Wednesday, everyone, you all take care and stay sane.
That's it. I'll hit the big red button to end it. Thanks for all the brilliant comments and the fantastic. We have a brilliant moderator as well who's been helping us out. BME, you'll have seen in there as well. He's been tweeting out the links to your channel, Patreon, and all the rest of it, and keeping an eye on the trolls, doing a brilliant job. Right, that's it for today. Thank you.